effects, whatever level they are structurally on the brain, isn't important. So I talked about this culture game with people. I talked about this culture game with places. I also like to do a thing where I play a culture game with television shows. I just show people like the most common, the most popular Japanese television shows, because I think people often have a notion of like what a Japanese television show is like, perhaps. Like they think, oh, there's game shows or whatever and whatnot. As an aside, there's no real like such thing as Japanese game shows. Like what people perceive of and post on YouTube, they're like, look at this crazy Japanese game show. Is actually like 99% of the time not a game show. It's just some segment of a comedy show taken completely out of context. So just that's an aside that has nothing to do with teaching languages. It just pisses me off. But anyway, I show people the most popular television shows in Japan because, of course, they've never heard of any of them. But like any Japanese speaker would know about all of these, right? And so I think, again, this is just kind of thing that opens up their eyes. Oh, wow, there is a whole Japanese speaking world out there that I know nothing about. And really the only way to be part of it, the only way to participate in this is to learn Japanese, and this can serve as super motivating. So the people game, the places game, I do the television thing where I just show little clips of Japanese television. People seem to like this. I do this little game where I um, I I pick up a bunch of famous Japanese bands and I cut up the pictures of them. So I have a bunch of pictures of bands or musical artists, whatever, and then I have their names, and I cut up all their names, and then I mix them all up, and I say try to match the name with the musical artist, because then I think this kind of draws people's attention to like, oh, here's what this person looks like, and I wonder who they are and what kind of music they make and where they're from and all this, and then I kind of, it's this type of game. Again, it's just something which brings people's attention to like how little they know about the language and the whole world that's waiting out there for them, should they be able to become a participant of this culture, of this world, by learning the language. And so there's any kind of number of ways you can do this, and I think the whole point of it is like you structure it as a game, perhaps, because this kind of makes people think it's an activity, but really it's basically just ways of, if you told people like, hey, I'm trying to increase your motivation, look at this image, isn't that beautiful, isn't Japan beautiful, don't you feel motivated? And people be like, I guess if you say so, I don't know. So we just, that's kind of what we're trying to do, but we just don't frame it that way. You see? Okay, let's move on. We talked about the role of a teacher, and we talked about ways of improving motivation. Now, I'd like to talk about a little bit about managing a classroom, a little bit into how you manage your class and like actual teaching, okay? So the first thing is, what happens often in a classroom is the teacher will ask a question, and I think asking questions as a teacher is a great device pedagogically, because you say, okay, who knows the answer to this? And if people have to think about it, then that's much more valuable than if you just tell them, okay, here's how it works. Because ultimately, as I said, if maybe you've been in some of my language class, heard me say this, is like, what we want is the language to go into our head, but we're not sure if it's in our head unless we kind of try to reach around in our head and try to pull it out. What I mean is, like, if I ask you, if I say, hey, how do you say hello in Japanese? Then you have to think, do I know this? Let me see, is that information in my head? Okay, here's the answer. And then you can say it. And so we know that the language has made its way in your head. And that's kind of the mission. And maybe it sounds silly to say it so directly like this, but that's exactly what we want, right? Whereas if I say, okay, everybody, how you say hello in Japanese is like this, then we don't know if this information has actually gone in your head. I mean, it has, at least temporarily, maybe, but we're all too familiar with the expression like in one ear and out the other. And so I think asking questions is a great device for managing a class and teaching a class. However, here's what happens is people often ask a question and they say, okay, we just use this verb in present tense, but what if we wanted to say, I went to the park. We don't want to say I'm going to the park. We want to say I went to the park. How would we say that? Who can guess how we'd say this based upon what we've learned? And then you look open at the class, not a single person raises their hand. And this can be shocking to you because if you've been a good teacher, like you're like, well, I taught the class really well. Everyone seemed to understand. I taught the concept. I said, is there any questions? No one had any questions. I said, you understand? They said, I understand. And I feel like I taught the class really well, and people seem to understand. But then I ask this question, no one raises their hand. So now you're thinking to yourself as a teacher is like, does no one know? Shouldn't everyone know? Shouldn't at least one person know? But no one's raising their hand. And this happens for many reasons. Like you don't want to be the like from the student's perspective, they don't want to be the over eager person who always raises their hand, teacher's pet, and like tries to answer every question. That can be annoying. They also might not be confident in the answer. They're like, well, I think it's this, but I don't want to be wrong. I don't want to make a fool of myself in front of everyone. And many other reasons why they might not. This is stupid. It's like somebody else to answer, whatever. So when I teach classes, I don't do this kind of, raise your hand and I'll choose someone. I just don't do it whatsoever. I feel like what happens is then there's this awkward moment of 20-second silence. I'm like, come on, somebody raise a hand. Somebody knows it. Okay, come on. Anyone want to? And then you have to coax the students. And I think we've all been there and seen that, right? So I never do this ever. What I just do is I just go from students in order. I like have the students sitting, and I kind of have an order that goes to them. Like in my personal way, I do it, left to right, front to back. And I always kind of make a joke because I always call on the students in this order. I say, obviously, whoever sits in the left front seat is obviously the student who has the most confidence because I'm always going to call on this person first. And then what you'll notice is that some people, when they think they're kind of good at the language, like the smart students will try to start sitting over there, and the bad students will kind of try to move to the back and to the right. And that's totally fine because that's how you want it to be. Is like you don't want to embarrass people. You want students to see the correct answer, and you want people to answer correctly. And so by the time you get to the back of the room, you should hope that the other students who need more time have heard the answer more time than you see what I'm saying. So when I ask a question, I just direct it to someone personally. I don't say, who knows this? I say, Sabika-san, what's the answer? Sabika-san, tell me what it would be in past tense. And a lot of students, a lot of teachers caution against this. They say, don't do this. Don't do this because some students don't like to be called on. You might embarrass some students. Like that's the whole point of asking them to raise their hand to answer, is that then the students who don't know don't have to expose themselves because they didn't raise their hand, so you can't call on them. So like if that's the whole point is they don't want to be embarrassed in front of people or whatever, right? That's why they don't raise their hand. So if you call on people without using this hand raising system, aren't you going to embarrass your students, humiliate them, shame them? They're going to be upset. And there is always this danger, but I think I have a few strategies to mitigate it. But I will just say, like I'm about to conclude this point, so I'll just say for this point, I will say my personal recommendation is don't use this, raise your hand if you know the answer system. Just call on people directly. It'll allow you to use your class time better because you don't realize how much of these awkward silences where you're waiting for people to answer the question and no one ever wants to raise their hand. And then it always is like the one student who always answers anyway because then they start to feel bad for you because they're like, oh, no one is raising their hand. I guess I'll do it. So it's just awkward, and I don't think it's the best thing. It's my personal opinion. So I just call on people directly. I just say, Randall, you answer the question. Sar, you answer the question. Adrian, you answer the question like this. Okay? And so how do I mitigate this problem of like some students might be embarrassed or ashamed or shy? It was, well, before I ask anyone anything, I always start my classes, like on the very first day, and I say this on the first day, but I don't just say it on the first day. I kind of say it like every day at the beginning of class for, maybe the first week or two. I say, hey, look, the point of this classroom is to have fun and to learn Japanese and, enjoy ourselves while we're doing it. So, there's no stress. There's no pressure in this classroom. I don't expect you to be perfect. I don't expect people, I know you guys will make mistakes because you mix something up or maybe you get nervous. That's totally fine. The point of this class is to just have fun, learn Japanese. If we make mistakes, that happens. So if you make a mistake, you don't need to worry about it all. There's no stress. No stress, no pressure. I kind of start like this, So then people say, oh, okay. And then what I also say, though, so I think that's a good start, but then what I also say is, now, and you've maybe heard my little spiel about this. This is my personal thing that I made up, and you can feel free to use it as you want. But I said, I do my little thing about I want you guys to be language learning scientists. And so if you haven't heard my little spiel about being a language learning scientist, I won't do that right now. I'll talk about that later. But say, okay, you guys are language learning scientists, whatever. And I say, so I will ask you questions sometimes that I know you don't know the answer to. I tell the students this. I say, I will ask you questions that I know you don't know the answer to, or at least I don't expect you to know the answer. So I'm going to ask you these kind of questions, and the point of it is not to shame you, is not to make you embarrassed. The point of it is because I think there's a pedagogical effect when I form this in the phrase of a question. It's just like it makes people think about it. It opens up a place in your brain to put the information. So sometimes I'll ask you questions you don't know the answer to, and don't be worried, like I'll ask you a question you don't know the answer to. I just want you to think about it. I don't necessarily expect that you know. And this kind of makes the classroom environment such that when I do ask students something they don't know, they kind of at least have this in the back of their mind. Oh, maybe this is one of those times where he's asking me a question and I don't necessarily have to know the answer. So the students don't have to be embarrassed and shamed and humiliated and beat themselves up as much when they don't know something. I'm not going to say it doesn't still happen. I still do see students like, their faces go red and they get really embarrassed when they get called on or they get something wrong. But I think this kind of helps create a positive classroom environment of just telling people like, hey, look, there's no stress. We're just here to have fun. We're here to learn Japanese. And I'll ask you stuff sometimes that you don't know, and I don't expect you know it. It's just part of my teaching strategy. So another thing that I say to my students is I say, when I ask you questions, I would request that you respect your classmates. And so how you respect your classmates is if I ask you something, if I ask Randall something, I say, Randall, do you know the answer? And he might struggle. And you might be tempted as a classmate to help him out and kind of give him the answer because, you don't want him to be embarrassed and maybe he just needs a little reminder. So you might be tempted to give him a hint or help him with the answer. But please don't do this. I say to the students, I say, please don't do this. If your students or if one of your classmates is struggling with coming up with the answer, just let them struggle. And it's not because we want to bring people pain or embarrassment or shame or anything like this. It's because actually this kind of struggling, or as I call it in this language learning process, I call it reaching. What you're doing is you're reaching around in your brain to try to find the information. Maybe it's there or it's not there. But when you're reaching for it, you're kind of know the place where it kind of should be, just like if you're looking for your keys and then they should be on the desk somewhere. You don't know exactly where they are, and you kind of like reach around the desk. You don't shove your hand up your ass. Like you kind of have a general idea about where the keys should be, but maybe they're not there, or maybe they are there and you just need to reach around somewhere, right? So we do the same process when you get asked a question. Maybe you can reach and you know exactly where your keys are and you grab them and you get them instantly, and that's fine. And maybe you need to reach around for 5 seconds and then you can find your keys, or maybe you look around and you're like, actually, no keys on my desk. What do you know? And so these kind of 3 things are possible. But when you get asked a question, it basically, your mind kind of is looking in the place where that information should be. If that makes sense. You're reaching around somewhere in your brain. Like you can actually feel the reaching, but if I ask you a piece of information, like maybe everyone knows, I say, okay, how do you say hello in French? In your brain, you just reached around somewhere and you said, well, it's bonjour, and probably everyone here knows that. But like how did you know it was, where was it in your brain? Maybe you needed to think about it for 1 second, or maybe you knew instantly. But like that information is somewhere in your brain. And so when I ask you a question of something you don't know how to say, like, how do you say hello in Lithuanian? And everyone's kind of thinking right now, do I know that? No, I don't know that. You might know that you don't know that. You might be like, do I know that? And you're thinking to yourself, what is this process of thinking? You're like, do I know that? How do I say that? Do I know that? That's reaching around for the information. So I tell my students, I say, hey, look, I ask you something you don't know. It's so that you can start reaching around in your brain and trying to find the information. If you don't know, that's fine, because reaching around is part of the learning process. And then when I tell you the information, if you don't know the answer, then your brain kind of has a better idea of where to put it. So when I ask questions to classmates, I ask you, please show respect for your classmates and never, give them help, never give them suggestion, never give them hints. Just only let the person talk who's been called on. So another little small technique I use that I like to use when I'm teaching classes is, when you enter a classroom, this is kind of, how should I say? There's often not a good atmosphere. You walk into a classroom and there's kind of tenseness in the air. There's a kind of anxiety, a tenseness in the atmosphere of the room. There's a teacher. Who knows what they're going to say? They might try to shame me. They might try to give me a bad grade. They might make a fool out of me. They might yell. There's other students. They might be mean to me. They might be better than me. They might be stupid. They might smell bad. Who knows? And so everyone kind of enters a classroom, and it's kind of a rare species of individual who walks into a classroom and like, yeah, I'm so glad to be here. Everything's going to be so fun and fine. That's usually not the typical experience. Usually you walk into a classroom and you're kind of like, it's like you're walking into a dark alley. You're like, is someone going to stab me in here? Maybe I'll sit over here. Shit, should I have sat over there? Oh God, now I'm sitting next to this guy. Is that my teacher? Oh man, they look like a homeless person. What? Oh God, what am I doing here? Should I leave this room right now? And it's kind of really tense and uncomfortable environment in the classroom. And of course, this is bad for learning languages. As I said, like for this filter to work and for the language to go into your head, you kind of have to have these good feelings. Like I said, you're the spokesman for the language. You want people to be comfortable in your presence. You want people to be comfortable in this classroom. You don't want them to start dreading the classroom and like, oh, whenever I go to Japanese class, it kind of sucks balls, so maybe I'm not sure if I want to go tonight. I think we've all had that experience. But in my classes, if I do say so myself, I think people have showed up to my class and they're kind of excited to be there because they know that, one, I don't make fools out of anybody. I don't make anyone look stupid. I don't yell at people. I talk to people nicely and calmly. And I kind of try to create a fun environment. We play these silly games. I make jokes. It's kind of just a pleasant place to be, hopefully. Hopefully, as a side benefit, you learn Japanese, whatever. But I think creating this kind of pleasant classroom environment is really important. And one of the tricks that I do to do this is I always come to the classroom early, and I always put on some music. Some music of like, if I can put on, a Japanese song, like I will also try to put on like a music video if I have like a projector. I try to put on the music video that goes with it, and something silly or fun or like, upbeat. Nothing like crazy. Nothing like some, dramatic love ballad or, death metal or something, but something like that's not going to be offensive to most people. And the effect this has is that when you walk into a room where there's music playing, you don't feel like there's not this awkward silence and tenseness. And also, when people come to the room, I say, hey, how's it going? Take your seat anywhere. And, there's some kind of music going on. And so then people kind of feel like, oh, this is not a tense classroom environment. Things are kind of casual here. And what I found is that when you do play this music, when people come into the classroom, so people come into a room and there's music playing, and I say, hey, you're here for Japanese? Okay, take a seat, then people feel a little more comfortable to chat with their classmates. And when you chat with your classmates, because some people are afraid to talk with their classmates because they don't want like everyone in the room to know they're going to like, hey, who are you? What is your major? Where are you from? And this kind of thing. But if there's music playing, then people kind of feel like, oh, it's a more casual environment. It's laid back. I can chat with people. I can do whatever. I can move and sit around. You sit here, sit there, whatever. And so that's this little strategy I like to employ. But now let's move on to a different kind of topic, which is perhaps one of the most critical things about having a successful class. Like I said, like in the big picture, we want to make things easy and increase motivation. And I talked about, in general, like as a general guiding strategy, you can think about that like as a teacher, I should never do anything where it's like, wow, my explanation was hard. People don't understand. Like it's never the burden of understanding is never on the students. You always have to make it easy to understand. So sometimes you might not realize that your explanation is confusing, especially because when it's a language you speak, you might be like, oh, this verb's transitive and this one's intransitive. And this one, you use this suffix, it means this, use this suffix, it means this, use this suffix, it means this. And to someone who knows the language, it's like, yep, okay. But to someone who doesn't know the language, it's like you might as well be speaking Greek all of a sudden. It doesn't make any sense. They can't follow it. They can't be like, wait, what? What was intransitive? Wait, what was that ending? And like, if you say ending once, you're like, oh yes, of course you use this ending. It's passive. But then people are like, wait, how does that work? What was it? Was it raradu? Was it reiradu? Was it waradu? Was it wario? What's going on? And so, always be trying to make things easy and like come from this perspective. Oh, when I make my lesson plan, when I'm teaching things, when I'm explaining things, it always has to be easy. But anyway, that's about the big points. Now we're getting into these small points, which is how do we use our classroom time? How do we use our classroom time? Well, the first thing is I like to think about being an instructor. As I said in the beginning, I said, well, some teachers would just
我们学习
read
汉
the
语
book
吧
to the student. I said, some teachers literally do quite literally, or basically do the equivalent of in practice, reading the textbook to the student. And I said, well, that's bad because usually textbooks are hard to understand. But it's also bad for another reason, which is that the student could just read the textbook outside of class, right? Like, the student's like, wow, he literally just read the book. I could have read it out of class. The students are going to be thinking, why did I come to class? So I think this kind of points out the idea that, as a teacher, I need to be giving them a kind of service that they can't get outside of the classroom. And that can be kind of challenging because when you think about it, it's like, well, a lot of people have made really good books about this. A lot of people have wrote lesson plans. I could just send the students the PDFs. A lot of students, a lot of people have made YouTube videos. So why teach it all? Why didn't I just be like, hey class, welcome. Here's a bunch of PDFs. Here's a book. Here's a bunch of links to YouTube videos, and go home and don't bug me. I mean, you probably could teach a language or any subject like this. But you have to be thinking about what can I offer to the class that they can't get without me. And one of the things is like, you can't do these games like outside of the classroom, like I described these games. You can't create this fun environment like outside of the classroom because people are watching this video in their homes or at school or who knows where they're reading this book. Like you can't control that environment outside, but you can create a pleasant and fun classroom environment. And you can also, the difference between teaching people and kind of what you might get in books or YouTube videos or whatever is like right now, I'm talking to you guys in a conversational tone. I'm talking to you guys as if you were my friends. I mean, some of you maybe are my friends. I don't like the other half of you. But the point is, like, you talk to people. I mean, it sounds kind of stupid. You talk to people just as if they were someone in front of you. Well, when you're teaching, hopefully they are someone just right in front of you. But I think we've noticed this disconnect when we hear teachers lecturing. They're often speaking a certain kind of like different language. It's like they're speaking book language or they're speaking academic talk. We can't really follow what they're saying. It's totally different from our experiences of when we talk to our friends. And this is, I think, why we can relate with the experience that many of us have of where like we didn't get the teacher's explanation, but we asked our friends to explain to us, like our peers. then all of a sudden it's like, oh, now I get it. Oh, he can speak my language, like not the literal language, like whatever, but like the actual, like communicate conversational way. Like someone can talk to us just like an equal in this conversational tone without relying on this kind of like book language. It's just so much easier to understand. And when you can give these opportunities for students to say like, okay, I just explained how these verbs work. Did you guys explain it? And some of your students will be like, no, quite frankly, I didn't explain it. So then you can explain it in a different way. You say, okay, let's think about it like this. Let me give you an analogy. And I think this is all part of what it means, when I said being a teacher is being a facilitator, it's making things easy. It necessarily implies that you're using these kind of explanations that is not, you don't just tell it how it is. Let's say you're learning physics or chemistry and you say, okay, someone says E equals mc squared. E is energy, m is mass, c is the speed of light squared. You just multiply it by itself. That's what it is. You've told them the truth. Like, yes, that's true. And that's basically all you need to know, but you haven't told it them in a way that makes it easy. And you've just told them what it is. And maybe for some students, like the smart ones and the motivated ones, maybe that's good enough. But for most students, they're like, what the fuck did he just say? So you need to appeal to these different ways of explaining it. Like, oh, let me make an analogy for you guys. Let me make a mnemonic for you guys. Let me explain it this way, or I'll also explain it this way. It's kind of like this. If you know Spanish, it's the same as this verb. If you know French, it's the same as this verb. Oh, this is just like, think about it, it sounds like this English word. And kind of giving all these little tips that are just little ways. Like, not everyone is going to be relevant to every student, but this is all about little things you can do to make things easy. And so that's also talking about, as a teacher, you need to be using the class time doing things that people can't do without you. If they can do it without you, then you're wasting their time, right? Like, you need to be, like, all of your class ideally needs to be used in a way such that they couldn't get this experience outside of the classroom. If they could, it's like, just give me the book then. Just send me the link. So as far as planning classroom time goes, it's then really important that you have a plan. I mean, it maybe sounds dumb, but you can clearly see sometimes, like, in some cases, teachers get to this point, like maybe the teacher teaches for 20 or 30 minutes, but it's an hour lecture, and then the teacher's like, I don't know, what do you guys want to go over? You guys want to review, or should we? You want me to say what I said again, or do you want to? I don't know. Do you guys want the next thing, or I think we've had these experiences where it's clear that the teacher didn't really plan what they were doing. So it's really important to plan what you're doing, because not only does this like change how the student's confidence in you as a teacher, because if you start to get the impression like, oh, this guy doesn't even know what the fuck he's doing. He hasn't even planned. He doesn't even know what we're supposed to do. He doesn't know what we're supposed to do, and he's the teacher. Like, even I know what we're supposed to do, and I'm not even the teacher. How can he ask us what to do? It's like, again, it's like this thing of, you're the doctor. Have the doctor say, I don't know, should we take your temperature? I don't know. Do you think I should look in your ear? What do we? I don't know. You don't want to have this kind of experience, because it really affects the student's confidence and their impression of you. So always have a plan, and I say always, it's better to overplan than to underplan, because when you underplan, you get into these kind of situations where, like, well, we have 10 minutes left, but I don't know what to do because we talked about everything. So that's it. And I guess, I don't know. What do we do? Should you guys want to go home, or should we do it again, or what? So you don't want to get into situations. So it's always better to overplan. Of course, this can take some getting used to. Like, you might have to teach this particular class 1 or 2 or 3 times before you kind of get, okay, this takes an hour. But I think if you keep your eye on the clock and you think about how much time you want to dedicate to each thing, you can always speak faster or speak slower or go over things in more detail or less detail, but kind of try to go through everything in your lesson plan. But it's better to overplan than underplan, and then have an idea of, like, oh, if it gets that we only have 5 minutes left and I don't have time to cover the last thing because the thing I'm talking about right now is going to take 5 minutes, then always know that you're in this situation. Like in this situation, what am I going to leave out? What am I going to leave out of the lesson if I don't have enough time? If I need to skip ahead? Because sometimes students have questions, or sometimes there's problems like the projector broke, or the marker ran out of ink. Always try to be super prepared and always over prepare rather than under preparing, and it will improve, I think, your experiences as a teacher, because it can be embarrassing as a teacher if you suddenly realize like, oh, I got to the end of my lesson plan, I don't know what to do, but also improves the impression your students have of you and their confidence. So the next thing is like, what do you expect of your students in terms of, they're being in the classroom? I always tell my students, like, I'm going to ask you stuff. I want everyone to participate. I know some of you are embarrassed and you don't want to participate, but I'm going to ask that you do anyway. If you don't know the answer, that's fine. Just try your best or whatever. So I say this, like, this is my expectation, is that people are actively participating in the thing. And I always organize activities. If you've been in some of my language classes, you've seen how I do it. As I said, okay, you're going to ask the person next to you this. You'll ask them this, they'll answer this. You'll ask them this, they'll answer this, and then you go to the next person. So like we kind of create a ring around the classroom where everyone has to ask a question and everyone has to answer a question. Everyone is going to talk and everyone's going to listen. And I say, okay, when it's not your turn to talk, you might be inclined to space out and not listen to your classmates because like, oh, he's just a classmate, he's dumb, he's probably getting it wrong anyway. But I say always pay attention to what your classmates are saying. There's a huge chance that like what they say is going to be the exact thing you need to say. You can learn from their mistakes and you can learn from their excellence when they do a good job. So always listen to your classmates. So I really clearly tell the students these kind of expectations I have. Listen to your class. You'll have to participate. You're going to have to talk in the classroom every time. I tell people, okay, I'm going to expect you guys, I'm going to expect the next class, I'm going to ask everyone to do this. So be really clear here. And then when it comes to like homework, because I think if your students, so like for a super beginner level class, if all your students do is like come to the class, then they can, depending on how clever they are, they might be able to get away with just doing this and not doing any homework. And so then they might be inclined to not do any homework, right? But I think that it can really help if you define very clearly what you want your students to do. As I assign homework, and they say, okay, here's some exercises, and I want you to do these exercises, and I'm going to turn them in, I'm going to grade them, and I'm going to give you points, and you have to get this right because it's all about points. And the problem with this is then that students, it becomes this kind of artificial system where students are much more concerned with earning points than they are concerned with achieving proficiency in the language. So I think like homework in itself where you grade it and there's points and all this is kind of pointless. I think it's unnecessary. And what I think is necessary is say, okay, here's what I expect you to do. I say, okay, I expect you to give a 5-minute introduction of yourself. I expect you to be able to ask these 5 questions. So how I'd like you to practice is like this, write these sentences down, memorize it, practice saying the questions, practice saying the answers, and then once you're confident in that, then you've done your job. So for some students, they might already be able to do this because they're quick learners, or maybe they had studied independently, so they only need to practice it once or twice and then they get it, or maybe they don't need to practice at all. For other students, they really need to practice. And I say, like, I tell the students exactly how you should practice, and I tell them what they'll be expected of them. And so then this kind of gives them a good idea. Like there's never any confusion about how should I be learning this language. You need to tell your students how you want them to learn it. Like how should they go about doing it? It should never be a mystery. It should never be like, well, I don't know about what's the next step? What should I do if I want to improve? If I want to do well the next class, if I want to meet the instructor's expectations, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to study. Should I study vocab? Should I do this? Like tell students clearly like what you're expecting to do. I always tell my students, don't study vocab, don't study grammar. Here's I've given you this dialogue, I've given you this exercise, write these sentences, ask these questions, do these answers, practice this speaking, send me, your self-introduction. I want you to make a recording. things like this, and then there's never any mystery, and you don't want there to be a mystery. So the basic point there is like I don't think like homework as we can traditionally conceive it of like something where we give exercises and give points and grades and like there's due dates and all this. I think it's stupid uh, because then it puts pressure on the students and then people, some people you'll notice they can get full points in the class, like they can ace their German class, they can be like the student with the highest grade in the class, but they actually suck at German. And so then you can see there's kind of a difference between developing this proficiency in the language and developing this kind of aptitude to pass tests. You see, and they're unfortunately they're often not related. So now let's talk a little bit about the one last thing about kind of classroom management before I talk specifically about what my ideas are about, like what I believe you should teach in a language learning class. So I'm going to tell you exactly what I think you should teach. But before I do that, there's one more thing about managing a classroom, and this is often a hard point for instructors, is that when you ask students to do these exercises, or you ask them a question, you say, what's the answer? They'll make a mistake. And if they give a blatantly wrong answer, then that's fine. That's kind of easy to understand. You say, okay, well, that's wrong. If you say, how do you say hello? And they say goodbye, you say, okay, well, you said goodbye. Actually, the answer is hello. And again, remember that you always have to be kind. You always have to be respectful and never make any jokes, at the expense of the students. I think you can make jokes that are like silly and funny. Like you can say like, if you ask someone, oh, how do you say this? And they accidentally say something like, oh, I want to surf on a titty or something like this. That's just really funny. You can say this and be like, actually, what you just said is completely ridiculous. Like, but never make the student feel bad or embarrassed about what they said. Like you can make jokes, you can be silly, you can have fun, but don't make fun of the students. Um, People might get offended and we say like, "Fuck you, man! Like, why would you be mean to me?" That's not right. Like I said, it can introduce this kind of tense anxiety into the classroom. Like I said, we often have this atmosphere of tenseness in the classroom that we want to avoid. We want people to feel relaxed, comfortable, motivated, and have this kind of general good feeling about the language and the culture when they're in the classroom. And so if we start making fun of students or, like making them feel bad about their mistakes, say like, hey, wait a second, I just told you what that verb meant 5 seconds ago. How could you not remember it? Like you've probably seen teachers do this, like, hey, pay attention, I just said this. Like you can give friendly reminders to students to be like, oh, remember, I was just talking about this. When we do this suffix, we change masu to mashita, whatever. You can do this, but be careful about when you correct students. Don't make them feel bad. Don't introduce this kind of negative environment to the classroom. It could really like put people off, and they might not want to speak up anymore. They might not want to take classes from you anymore. They might not want to learn this language anymore. So it's kind of clear, though, you need to correct people if they say completely the wrong thing. But then often what happens is people say kind of the wrong thing, like just the pronunciation is bad. And this is hard because often when we're learning a language, there might be sounds which these people are completely foreign to them. Like if you're learning French or German, you have this R sound hard for people to make that don't speak this language. Languages that have the sound like R, like français, like Frankreich, or something like this. These are sounds that are hard for people to say, like riche, whatever. This is a hard sound for people to say. So people might be inclined to say like Frankreich, Francais, or Francais, Frankreich, Rauch, Acht, instead of Acht. They might say ich, and so on and so forth. I think you can think of the examples that are relevant to your language or languages, and people just don't say the sound right, as maybe they don't have the sound U, so they say E or U or whatever. And so then if the student says it kind of right, then you kind of have this conflict as an instructor, because if you correct them, um, you might feel like you always should correct them, because like, oh, always. But if you correct them, they often don't get it right. If you say, well, it's not français, it's français. It's not français, it's français. Um, but then they can't wrap their minds around this. And even if they could, if they're like, oh, I see, it's that other sound which I can't say, then it's like they can't say it. They'll be like, and now they're trying to make these weird noise and they don't know how to make it, because being able to make sounds in a language involves exercising your speech organs in ways that you maybe have never used them that way before. If you don't speak French or German or one of these other languages, maybe you never had a uvular consonant before. If you just speak English, it's a completely foreign sound, and you need practice. Even a lot of Americans that can't do a trilled R, they just can't go r. They say no, it's not Rome, it's Rome. They just can't make that sound. I mean, they can learn to make it, but it involves, practice. Just think about it like if you're teaching a physical skill. If you're like, here's how you serve in tennis, and you throw the ball up and you hit it across the net, and then someone tries it and they hit it into the net because they've never served a tennis ball before, and it's kind of hard. You wouldn't be like, no, not into the net, over the net, you silly. And then they serve it again. No, you silly bastard. I didn't say hit it into the net, serve it over the net. And you see how this sounds ridiculous, because of course they know it's supposed to be over the net. They just can't do it. So even if you correct them, it doesn't help. And also if you correct them, then it starts to get annoying, potentially. And some students like it. If I get even 1 centimeter of a sound wrong, I want you to correct me. Some students are like this. Most of them aren't. Most of them, you correct them, it embarrasses them, or it's annoying. It's you said mashta instead of mashta. It's like, oh, I know it was mashta. I slipped the slip of the tongue. Or, oh, sorry, I just messed it up for a second. Whatever. So when you correct students, always try to do it to this kind of tactful way. Try to be tactful. Try not to be excessive. Try not to be annoying, and try to always have this calm, warm demeanor if you're going to correct students' mistakes. Remind them if they make a mistake that you expect them to make mistakes. Remind them when you ask them a question that you will ask questions sometimes that you don't expect them to know. And I would highly recommend that anytime a student gives an answer, you always give positive feedback. Now, this is kind of like, some people are like, well, that's just kindergartner bullshit, and we should treat people like adults. These aren't children. Not everyone gets this participation award and all this. And yeah, sure, I can totally appreciate that sentiment, and maybe it's appropriate in other places, but in the language learning classroom, we do have this kind of delicate balance of people have to be at comfort, they have to be at ease, they have to have positive feelings to be able to learn this language. And so if you're like, no, that was completely wrong, and you're a fucking idiot, then people will be like, well, I don't care about this language anymore. You know what? I actually don't like Chinese. I just found out. I don't like Chinese, and I don't want to learn it from you, and I don't want to learn it from anyone. Fuck this language. I'm actually going to take up a new hobby. And, maybe you'd say, well, that guy's immature. And maybe he is. But the thing is, as language learning teachers, we have this unique opportunity of motivating the students, making things easy for them. And like I said, if you can get your students to learn a new language, and actually, probably you individually will not be the person that pushes this individual from zero proficiency to fluency. Probably not. If they get to fluency, it won't be because everything they learned from you. It's probably impossible. I mean, I would say it quite literally is impossible, unless you're on a deserted island and it's only you two there. They'll learn from books, they'll learn from songs, they'll learn from television programs, they'll learn from interacting with other people. They might take other classes from other instructors. So it's not going to be that everything they know they owe to you. But you have this opportunity to push them towards fluency. to push them towards having a skill which will dramatically change their lives, which can open up this whole new world to them. Uh, they might get a job of it. They might get a marriage out of this. They might make a whole new circle of friends. They might gain a whole new level of confidence in their lives. They might learn about stuff that is really their thing. They finally found their thing, their people, their interests. You've given these people a new reason to find life worth living through this language. And I don't think I'm being hyperbolic about this. I think it's really true based upon my own experiences and my experiences of those with students. So you have this opportunity to make this real positive change, and positive contribution, perhaps I should say, to someone's lives. But you also have the opportunity, I mean, you have the risk of, if you're an asshole, then people who maybe otherwise would have learned this language, now you've kind of spoiled it for them. So I would highly recommend, always give feedback, positive feedback. When a student gives an answer, say, oh, that was very good. Just start out with that. Like I said, you might in your mind be thinking like, oh man, this guy, he sucks. This guy sucks. I don't know why he sucks at Japanese so bad. Everyone else in the class is good, but just this one guy sucks. This might be your exact experience. Like, I've had classes like this. I've seen classes like this. I've been in classes like this as a student, in which it's like there's the one guy in the class who just sucks so bad compared to everyone else. They might be inclined to just be like, dude, you suck. Maybe Estonian just isn't for you. But don't do this, because not only does it ruin it for him or her, it can also, like I said, make the other people in the class start to feel uncomfortable. So always respond when someone gives an answer. Say, that was very good. Just make it a habit. That was very good. You can say this. Like, maybe it wasn't actually very good, but you can do this much as a language teacher. It's kind of like I said, you're an expert. Part of being expert is kind of like putting on a performance. Maybe you actually feel like shit and you don't want to be there and you don't want to teach class today, but you're going to give a good lesson and you're going to be positive and you're going to be encouraging, because that's what a language learning teacher does. It's just like, you watch James Bond. Well, Daniel Craig isn't actually James Bond. He's just some fucking English actor, right? Like, he's not a special agent. He doesn't know kung fu. He doesn't know marksmanship. He's just pretending. But he worked his ass He's pretending that he's James Bond so that you'd really believe it, and then we have this nice product, which is this James Bond film. It's just like this. You're a language instructor. You need to be encouraging. You need to be warm. You need to be kind. You need to have a well-planned class, a well-managed classroom, and that's your expertise. That's the prescription you're giving to these students to take them from this level of ignorance of the language, ignorance of the culture, this kind of caricaturized idea that they have of the people, of the culture that they're learning, and kind of take them to this, give them this new skill, push them in this way. I mean, I always tell my students, like I said, you're not going to be the one person that leads this person to fluency, but you can be the one person that kind of sets off like a catalyst, serving as an impetus for this person to move towards fluency. And you can be the one push they need to make this change in their life. So you need to do this. That's why I say, be positive. I always say, when people give an answer, say, that was really good. And then say, I just have one recommendation, is that you said mas, you should have said mashita. You said this, you should have said jarimasen. Well, that was really good. It's just, let's remember, it's not it's ah. It's not it's ah. Okay? And make corrections like this. Now, okay. I'll talk for about 10 more minutes, and then maybe we'll take a break, or maybe we'll continue this on some other day. But I just have that was all about the role of a teacher, how to manage a classroom, how to motivate students, how to correct mistakes, and how to plan your classroom time appropriately. But now I kind of want to get into the actual, like, what do you teach students? What specifically, in terms of language, what do you teach them? Now, this is something which is like, perhaps, like everything I've told you up till now, I think is actually the most important part, which is why I said it first. Because, like I said, I think if you can just kind of know this basic concept. Like if I had to describe how to teach in 2 sentences, I'd say motivate the students, make things easy, and then my talk would be over. But I hope you found that there's other aspects to it, to running a well-functioning classroom and teaching a good language class. But this is all about presentation, attitude, atmosphere, and so on. But now let's get into this next bit, which is like, what do you actually teach the students? And this is perhaps like the most contentious part, because if you look at a language textbook, like go buy 100 language textbooks, go look at the first chapter of each of them, and you will see something different in every one. Well, see, some of them it's like John has arrived at the train station, and he it, and here's the dialogue to teach him how to buy a ticket. And some of them are like, Jose has arrived at the hot dog stand, and now let's learn how to order hot dog. And you see another book, and it's like, Suzuki-san has come, and he needs to say hi to his neighbor, Tanaka-san, and listen to the dialogue between these two as they say hi. Another book starts, and it says, let's learn the nominative case. You're going to learn the nominative case, and it has this ending. And another book starts, and it says, these are the 50 most important words in the language. Another book starts, and it says, let's learn the colors. Red, orange, yellow, blue, violet, indigo. So you can see there's a huge variety in language learning textbooks, and you'd think, well, that's peculiar. Some books are starting with grammar. Some books are starting with dialogues. Among the books that start with dialogues, some of them are talking about meeting people for the first time, how to say hello. Some of them are talking about how to order train tickets. In a language learning book I have, the very first dialogue is like how to buy cigarettes. And maybe that, at some point, to some cultures, that's like, what's the most important thing for a language learner to learn? I don't know. It's probably buying cigarettes. Like, this has to be a thought process that went through these people who made this book. Because, of course, if you're the language learning teacher, now, I think this is basic. Like, I don't think I should have to tell you this, but you should be thinking to yourself, well, I'm teaching a beginning language learning course, or whatever level it is, but let's just say beginning. What's the most important thing for these people to do? Because, of course, like, a language encompasses everything. And when we say you're fluent, it kind of, it's a very fuzzy definition, but when we say you're fluent, it kind of has this implication that you can get by in many different kinds of situations. Like, not only can I order hot dogs and buy cigarettes, but I can also have a couple words about what I think about the politics and the economy, or like I can relate my experiences, and I can ask you about what you're doing next weekend, and this kind of thing. I can order a cheeseburger at a restaurant. I'm fluent in the language. That's what this means. And so you say, well, I want people to be fluent, and so I need to learn all of that. I need to learn all of what I just described. And so I should hope that your idea about being a language learning teacher is not just like, well, I'll just choose one topic at random. Like today we're going to learn colors. Tomorrow it's learning about hot dogs, and the next day we're going to learn about how to talk about our feelings on abortion. Like, that's totally random. And you don't want to teach in a random way. You would ideally teach in a way that builds up, because, like I said, our role as an instructor is to make things easy. And so for teaching things randomly and there's no order, it's hard to follow. You've made things hard. If you failed as a teacher, it doesn't matter what you did, you failed. So we need to make things easy. We need to make things logical so that the students will go like, oh, if I do it like this, You don't teach the students the most hard grammar on the first day. You want to teach them the easy grammar, whatever. So think about, what is the most important thing to teach these students? And think about that. That should be the thought process in your head. Okay, so I don't know anything in the language. What's the most important thing I can learn? And this is exactly how I developed my curriculum for teaching languages. I said, okay, and I basically recapitulate this process when I teach languages to beginners. I say, okay, sabikas, what's the most important thing you need to be able to say? What's the first thing before you learn anything in Japanese? What's the first thing you need to be able to say? And you might say, well, maybe hello, or maybe tell someone my name is, or the response like this. So I think that's a good answer. Some people will say, I don't know. I don't know. Actually, many people say this. I don't know. But I say, well, I'm forcing you to answer. I want you to come up with an answer. I don't care if it's a stupid answer. No one ever says like, I guess the first thing we should learn is how to buy cigarettes or share our feelings about the current state of the economy. No one says this. But surprisingly enough, some people make language courses like this. So I don't know what their thought process was, but I just would think that it's kind of fucked up. So when we teach beginners, you need to think about this, and this is exactly how I said. I said, okay, so now we know how to say hello. We need to know how to say our name. What's the next thing we need to learn? And I just kind of, I actually do have it planned very carefully. Like I said, I have all my lessons planned very carefully, but I do present it to the students like this kind of way because I want them to think about learning a language this way. If you could just think to yourself, what's the next thing I need to learn? And you always had a clear answer, then you'd never need any teacher. You just figure out how to say that shit. It's like, yeah, okay, well, now I need to learn how to say this. Okay, now I'm going to learn how to say this. And then you just learn it every bit by bit. And people who do this, and many people do, they say like, they have a very clear idea, like they need to express themselves in this language. And the people who have this need and they're like, well, I need to say this, I need to say this, how do I say this, I need to say this, are the people who ask the most questions and are always trying to figure out how to say stuff, not because they got assigned homework or not because the teacher told them to, but because they feel this genuine, earnest need and desire to express themselves in this language. Those people are the best students. They get, they will learn the language the fast, they'll have the best pronunciation, they'll have the best grammar, and they'll be the top students no matter what, just because they have this kind of intrinsic, or maybe, I don't know if it's intrinsic or learned or whatever, but they have this kind of way of going about the problem. And I think it's a very smart way. But as an instructor, as a language instructor, as I said, you need to have an expertise. You need to know yourself. What is it that we need to be learning? So what is it? Well, obviously people have different answers to this. Like I just said, buy 100 books, you get 100 different answers. And actually it's been, a hobby of mine through the years. I've literally bought hundreds and hundreds of language learning textbooks. And I even had a job at one point where I was paid to review language learning textbooks. That's like all I did is I would just like go through language learning textbooks and then review them for these like language schools. And so some people have this opinion that like all language learning textbooks are bad and dumb because people think, oh, that's the textbook knowledge. And like textbooks can be really shitty, but they can also be really good. I mean, a well-made textbook is the best thing ever because it's like having a super good, smart, fun teacher in a book. And you can do that. As many people don't do that because they're incompetent or because they never had the idea of doing so. But there are books like this and they're amazing. That's not the point. That's just an aside. Point is, what should we have the students learn? Well, most language learning materials kind of think about the perspective of a tourist. So somebody who's going to come to Estonia and they're going to find themselves in Estonia. And now, what's the first thing they need to do? And they say, okay, well, the first thing the person arrives there, well, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to go through customs. So there's a little dialogue about talking to the customs officer. And the next thing they do is they're going to need to buy a ticket to the train. So now there's a dialogue or a lesson about how to order tickets to the train. And then they're going to be hungry. So now they need to go to a restaurant and figure out how to order food. And I think you can probably relate with this with your experience in language classes and language learning textbooks or materials that they often have this criteria, which when you think about it is actually kind of like made in mind with like a tourist in mind. We're gonna deal with conversations at the airport, ordering food, ordering tickets, and there's gonna be a unit about food. There's gonna be a unit about clothing because you're gonna go shop for clothing. There's gonna be a lesson on colors because you need to talk about what color of blouse you want to buy. And I think we can kind of relate with this. I would argue that this is completely useless. This is the exact wrong way to go about teaching a language. And people are so used to learning it this way. They think that that's how they should do it, and maybe they had positive experiences they liked the book that they had before. They like the teacher that taught them that way before, so that's what they'll expect. And I'd had students like every single class. Um, Students come up to me and they say, "Hey, Ty, um, I noticed we haven't done a unit on food. When are you going to do a unit on food? Let's have a unit on food." And what I always tell them is, "Oh yeah, we're going to do that soon. It'll be soon. We'll go over it soon." Which is a complete lie. Actually, we're never going to go over it because that's fucking stupid. Because here's the thing. Why do I think this is stupid? All of these conversations that we've talked about, whether it's ordering food, buying clothes, buying a ticket, talking to the customs officer, these are all 10 to 30-second interactions that, that like rewarding interactions of your life. When you think about like what do people do? Like people love talking, people love communicating. But when you want to like communicate and experience language and this kind of thing, you go and like, oh, I just ordered a hot dog. I feel so good about that conversation that I had with the. I'd like one hot dog, and he was like, "That's €2," and then I gave him €2, and then I left. No, that's like a 10 or 30-second interaction at most, and it's not rewarding. It's not fun. I mean, maybe you feel a little bit cool, like, haha, I ordered a hot dog. I'm so cool. But then you kind of realize like how fucking lame it is. Like you just said one word. You're like hot doggy. It's a hot doggy. I'm assuming that's how you order hot dogs in Estonia. But it's kind of a worthless interaction. Um, it's not really meaningful. And so the other thing is that like when you run into communicative difficulties, like you learn how to say a hot dog, please, sir, I'd like a hot dog. But when it comes down to it, like if you guys like, oh, do you want a big one or a long one? Do you want mustard or do you want sauerkraut? Actually, we're out of hot dogs. This one's a little burnt. Do you want that one? Or like, oh, I still need. Actually, someone's coming in the back. This is to go. It's going to be 5 minutes. When you run into that kind of communication situation, now you're completely lost. And like maybe you learned how to say one hot dog, please, and you said it perfect. Just now he said all this stuff, and then you have to go, well, the truth, sir, is that I don't speak Estonian at all. Do you speak English? and then it's just stupid and kind of superficial. So I think these kind of like task-based, tourist-based interactions are kind of dumb. And what I like to think about is like the actual conversations that are meaningful for us are not when we go buy tickets or order food. It's like when you meet a native speaker of the language and you can kind of make friends with them, right? Like you want to go meet a native speaker and you don't want to say like, hey, how's it going? Is your name's Randall? Oh, I see. I'd like a hot dog. No, this is not the conversation you want to have. The conversation you want to have is like, oh, hey, tell me something about yourself. Where are you from? What are you about? What are you doing? What do you do for fun? Are you married? Do you want to marry me? These kind of things. Like, these are the kind of conversations you want to have. Talking about your interests, talking about life, you're talking about your thoughts, you're talking about your plans, you're talking about your past. Tell me a story. Oh, have you ever done this? Have you ever been there? These are the kind of interactions that make up not only our normal daily interactions, like with our friends. And what do you talk about with your friends? Like the people that you actually talk to, not because you have to, but because you want to. It's about your experiences. Like, hey man, you won't believe this happened today. It's about your plans. It's like, hey dude, do you want to do this in the future with me? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? I mean, maybe you're not getting these kind of interview like questions, but you're asking this kind of things. Like, hey, what do you want to do after high school? What are you going to do after you graduate? Oh, tell me about the time. Did you ever go camping? Have you ever met Mary? These are the kind of conversations that people actually have because they like, and have because they're interesting, and have because they're fun, and have because they're rewarding, and not ones that is just like, I have to do that because I need a hot dog, and so therefore I have to order one, and so I have to know how. So my language learning strategy is I never focus on these kind of task-based tourist kind of interactions. I try to teach people how to make friends. And how you make friends is you have to get acquainted with people. You have to be able to know their name. You have to ask where they're from. Maybe you want to know a little bit of information about them. And then you also need to be able to talk about yourself. So when we're making a class for beginners, we need to think, what is this? What are the phrases and things that this person can say that is gonna let them make friends? Or when they meet a native speaker, they can actually have a good conversation with them. Because you might meet a native speaker and be like, "Hey, man, I'm studying Spanish," and they're like, "Oh, that's cool. You want to talk?" And you're like, "Yeah, except I can't talk. Although I do know all the colors of the rainbow and I know how to order hot dogs, and I can tell you the word for blouse and skirt and shoes and socks. I just don't know how to say, you know, how are you?" So think about how you can organize your class in a way that goes from easy to difficult, but also in a way you're thinking about what are the kind of interactions that it can have that can get these people to make friends. And a good way to think about it, of course, you start from the easiest. Like, what's the easiest sentence you can make? Don't be too concerned with, like, sometimes you're like, well, actually, when people introduce themselves in Estonian, they use this really complicated phrase. So I would stress ease first, like easing people into the language. Maybe that's actually not the most, like, when I teach people how to say, uh, introduce themselves in Korean, I don't initially teach them the most common way, because the most common way is actually somewhat complicated. Well, it's not so complicated, but it's more complicated than the way I teach them. So I teach them a simple way which works and is grammatically correct and everything, but is a bit more simple, so that they can build this base of proficiency, and then we can build from there. So start thinking about sentences that you can use that have like you can use the same type of sentence. So the ones I generally use in my class for beginners is, you say something like, I am blank, because you can use this in many different ways. Like you can say, I am blank, like for your name, like I am Ty or I am Randall. You can say it for your occupation, like I am a student. You can say it perhaps, depending on the language, like to say where you're from, like I am from the US or I am American, and so on. So now they can use the same formula to say many things. And I think like anytime you can build up like this and like use the same basic structure to say many sentences, then this is a way which makes things logical and easy. And so you're kind of doing your job as an instructor. But then you might be thinking, well, what how do I know what is the next thing? Like, I don't know, there's all kinds of things you can ask about a person. Like what do I teach next? Well, when we talk about the things that are important to learn about a language, I think there's actually a few words which we can all agree are super necessary, are super important. If you don't know these, then you can't claim any proficiency in the language. And so, if something is that important, then I think it's really important. Like, you might not know the word hot dog, but otherwise be fluent in the language. I believe this is possible. But there are some words that if you don't know them, then you definitely aren't fluent, because like you have no system. And what are these words? Well, I would argue to start out with, these are the question words. What? Who? When? Where? How? Why? How many? What kind of? These kind of words. If you don't know these words, like, you can't know English and not know these words. I think we'd all agree on that. You can't just be like, yeah, I went through. I speak English completely fluently. I just don't know what, who, what, when, where, and why mean. These are just words that escaped me. Like, no, you definitely have to know those words, otherwise you don't know shit. But we never think about this. Like, have you ever been to a language class and they who, what, when, where, why, how many, what kind of, etc.? No, you probably haven't. You probably never went to a class where they taught this first thing. And yet, I think we can probably all agree on some level, maybe this is the very most important thing. Like, if you just knew the question words, like, maybe you could learn everything else in a language just through context. Because if you just knew the question words, you could just point at shit and be like, what? Who? Why? And then just kind of pick up everything else out of context. But we don't think about like things like this. Now, I'm not saying day one teach everyone the question words, because if you give someone a list of 10 random words, like, this has no context, and they're going to have a hard time recalling them all. Like, I'm sure if Sar, who left because, I don't know, he just lost his math status, he left in the middle of my lecture. What an asshole. I'm just kidding. I love Tsar. Actually, I don't really. I mean, he's okay. Anyway, if I was to ask Tsar to tell me what are the question words in Polish, and like he listed them for me, like I think I'm kind of good. I probably wouldn't remember them all. I might not remember any of them because out of context, it only has so much meaning. I'm not suggesting you just give people a list of all the question words because they're the most important. They might be, but this can kind of serve as a guide of you think. Okay, well, these are the question words. Let me think of a relevant question that's relevant to teach the students using each one. Like what? Okay, what is your name? Maybe it's a good one. Like who? Who are you? I don't know if that's a good one. Like who are you? So in my class, how I teach it is like I think, well, who are you is a stupid question. Like who are you? No one ever says this unless it's like suddenly you've broken into someone's home and they're like, who are you? Something like this. But so that's a silly question. But the question I teach in my classes is like, who do you live with? I think, like, do you live alone or who do you live with? Something like this. Like when? When are you going to Japan, for example? Because, always relate it back to you're trying to have a successful conversation with the native speaker. Think about what kind of information you want to share together. Like, what is your name? What are you interested in? Who are you learning Japanese with? Who's your teacher? Who do you live with? Who do you play chess with? Who do you play badminton with? When are you going to Japan? When do you study Japanese? Where do you study Japanese? Do you study in school? Do you study at home? How do you study Japanese? Do you use books? Why are you studying Japanese? What got you interested in Japanese? How long have you been studying? What kind of music are you into? This kind of thing. So I don't organize it like this. Um, um, so to speak, like by teaching just all these questions, because I think that can be confusing, and then people have like a bunch of random questions they want to think about. I kind of break things down where I say like, okay, let's start with one, what question, and then kind of try to build a little base, and then learn how to give answers. And maybe we want to, for anything, you're teaching beginners, you got to think like, okay, they question, now they have to know the answer, they have to know how to say the yes, they have to know how to say the no answer, they have to know how to say I am, they have to know how to say I am not, and kind of just build up. So that would be my primary like principle guiding principle for making a class for beginners, and that's kind of how I try to teach. Saying that, I've been talking for over 2 hours, so I think that's enough for now. I still have some other stuff to say. I don't know if any of you guys are still listening or if you found this information to be useful, but depending on the answers to these questions, I may continue this series and talk more details about lesson, teaching grammar, doing speaking exercises, and more details about when you're planning lessons, like what kind of stuff you teach the students. So anyway, thanks for your attention, everyone. I hope that I at least said one or two things that are useful to you. And like I said, I'll let out another announcement if I end up talking about this stuff again. Thanks. I'll see you guys later.